The light within the Chamber of Echoes was not born of technology, but of history itself. It was the ambient, spectral glow of 1,000 dying stars, captured and held in perpetual resonance within the crystalline walls of the Council's sanctum. Each facet of the cavernous hall reflected a different age, a different truth, a different sorrow. High luminary Xyler of the Cathar felt the weight of them all pressing upon his composite mind, a pressure that had been building for cycles. His form, a tall, multifaceted column of living crystal, refracted the ancient light, casting a kaleidoscope of pale blues and deep violets upon the polished obsidian floor. He remained still, a monument of patience, but within his resonant core, a storm of dissonant frequencies churned. Silence was the most damning sound. It was a vacuum where frantic debate should have been. For 3 rotations, the representatives of the Galactic Council's core worlds had gathered, their initial shock curdling into a thick, palpable dread. Before them, suspended in the chamber's center, a holographic sphere of the galaxy pulsed with a sickly, invasive light. A single sector, one long cordoned off and designated a zone of silence, was the source of the corruption. It was the Sol system, Earth system. "The quarantine field is not failing," Warlord Grak of the Vorlag hissed, his chitinous exoskeleton rasping as he shifted his immense weight. His mandibles clicked in agitation, a sound like shearing metal that scraped at the chamber's serene acoustics. "It was not breached. It has been unmade, erased from the causal framework as if it were never there." Grak's species was one of hardened carapaces and harder philosophies. They saw threats in every shadow, and in humanity they had seen a shadow that threatened to devour the stars. He gestured a clawed appendage at the pulsating map. "We were fools to believe a barrier of mere spacetime could contain such a malignancy. We should have sterilized the world when we had the chance." Speaker Lyra of the Cygnian Ascendancy shimmered into greater focus, her form a graceful confluence of light and feathered energy. Her voice was like the chiming of stellar winds, yet it carried a profound weariness. "Sterilized a world teeming with nascent, sentient life? Warlord, your paranoia would have us commit atrocities to soothe your own anxieties. We chose containment, not genocide. It was meant to be an act of preservation, for them and for us." "Preservation?" Grak's laugh was a dry, rattling cough. "We built a cage around a fire, and now the cage is melting. We told them they were alone in the universe, a lie of magnificent arrogance. We told ourselves that their chaotic, violent nature would cause them to consume one another. We watched their broadcasts of war and self-destruction, and we congratulated ourselves on our wisdom. We saw their brief, flickering lives as evidence of their inferiority." He pointed a claw directly at the Sol system's representation. "And all that time, while we slumbered in our self-assured peace, the fire was not dying. It was learning to control the furnace." Xyler felt a low hum of agreement from the other delegates, a subtle shift in the chamber's resonant frequency. The Cathar did not feel emotions in the organic sense. They experienced states of harmonic or dissonant alignment with the universe. The current state was a cacophony of fear. He remembered the early observation records millennia ago. Humanity, a species that aged and died in the span of a single Cathar meditation cycle. A species that built monuments to gods they invented, then tore them down in fits of iconoclastic fury. They mastered fission and nearly annihilated themselves, then reached for their moon with machines born of the very same rivalries that fueled their wars. They were a paradox, creators and destroyers, poets and butchers, all trapped in fragile shells of flesh and bone. The Council, a body of ancient, slow-evolving species who measured their progress in geological epochs, had looked upon humanity with a mixture of fascination and terror. Their speed, their raw, untamed potential, was like an uncontrolled chain reaction at the heart of the galaxy. And so they had made the decision, the great deception. They had woven a subtle, powerful field around the Sol system, a filter that blocked all external signals and warped light just enough to make the universe beyond appear utterly empty. To Earth, the stars were distant, silent, and impossibly far. To the galaxy, the Sol system became a silent world, an anomalous dead zone that all navigators were programmed to avoid. The official record, classified at the highest levels, listed Earth as a Class 7 toxic world, its biosphere having collapsed from a runaway industrial catastrophe. A convenient lie to bury a disquieting truth. "The anomaly is not an energy signature we can classify," a technician's voice echoed, disembodied through the chamber's ambient field. The voice was flat, professional, yet strained by an underlying current of disbelief. "It is an absence, a perfect void. Where the quarantine field once stood, there is now a hole in spacetime, a patch of absolute nothingness that is expanding. Grax slammed his fist on the railing before him, the impact sending a shudder through the crystalline structure. It is a weapon, a field of null entropy. They have weaponized the concept of non-existence. I told you this would happen. Their minds are inherently chaotic. They do not build, they dismantle. They will unmake us all. Or perhaps they are simply reaching out, Lyra countered, her light form wavering with distress. Perhaps they discovered the lie and are now emerging, not with malice, but with questions. Imagine their perspective, to awaken from a dream of cosmic solitude to find a universe teeming with the very life you were denied knowledge of. Would your first act be war or wonder? Xyler finally allowed his own resonance to fill a portion of the chamber. His voice was not sound, but a direct telepathic impression, a cascade of pure, structured thought that settled into the minds of all present. The distinction between war and wonder may be irrelevant. The nature of their emergence transcends our understanding of physics. We operated on the assumption that they would develop along a predictable technological path, propulsion, energy manipulation, perhaps limited temporal mechanics. We prepared for ships. We did not prepare for this. He focused his consciousness on the holographic display. The patch of blackness was no longer just a hole. It was a wound, and from that wound something was bleeding into their reality. The stars around the Sol system were not just blocked. They were flickering, their light bending and distorting as if seen through a flawed lens of unimaginable gravitational power. The fabric of the galaxy was being stretched, warped by a force that had no business existing. They are not coming to us, Xyler projected, the thought laced with a profound, cold clarity that silenced all other debate. They are bringing their own piece of spacetime with them. They are moving not through our universe, but alongside it, imposing their own physical laws upon its structure. The full weight of their arrogance crashed down upon the council. They had treated humanity like a primitive culture to be isolated and observed from a safe distance. They had built a wall, believing themselves the masters of the galactic garden, pruning a weed they deemed too aggressive. But the weed had not withered. It had grown in the dark, its roots reaching not into soil, but into the bedrock of reality itself. And now it was breaking through the foundations of everything they knew. A new alert chimed, a high-pitched, piercing tone reserved for events of existential significance. The disembodied technician's voice returned, stripped of all professional composure, leaving only raw, naked awe. The void, it is resolving. The absences, it is taking form. The stars, oh, by the first light, the stars have vanished. In the holographic display, a vast swath of the sector went dark. Not the slow dimming of a dying star, but an instantaneous, surgical excision of light. A blanket of absolute blackness was thrown over a region of space so immense it would take a conventional council fleet years to cross. And in the center of that unnatural night, points of light began to appear. They were not stars. They were ships. But they were not made of metal or alloy or any recognizable matter. They were constructs of pure, silent darkness, silhouettes against a darkness they themselves had created. Their forms were fluid, geometric impossibilities that seemed to shiver and recalibrate with every passing moment, as if their existence was a constant, deliberate act of will. There were swarms of them, legions, an armada of such impossible scale that it dwarfed the combined fleets of the entire Galactic Council. They did not announce themselves with engine flares or radiation signatures. They simply were an undeniable, silent, and terrifying fact. Beneath the suffocating weight of their presence, the very stars themselves had been extinguished. Warlord Grax stood frozen, his aggressive posture collapsing into something resembling primal fear. Even his species, bred for eternal conflict, had never conceived of a foe that arrived by erasing the sky. Speaker Lyra's form dimmed, her light feathers contracting as if from a physical blow. The philosophical and ethical ramifications were secondary now to the sheer, overwhelming reality of what they were witnessing. Xyler felt a resonance he had only ever encountered in the abstract Cathar texts describing the birth of the universe. The profound, humbling terror of witnessing a power that could command the void. His own crystalline structure vibrated with a low, uncontrolled frequency. He was afraid. It was a disharmony his kind had not experienced on a collective level for eons. They know his thoughts echoed in the chamber, a quiet, final admission of their failure. They know we lied. They know we imprisoned them, and they have come to deliver their judgment. The silence in the chamber of echoes returned, deeper and more absolute than before. It was no longer the silence of debate, but the silence of a tomb, the silence of an entire civilization holding its breath before the executioner's blade. Out in the cold, remade darkness, the human fleet hung motionless, a testament to a power so profound it had no need for threats or proclamations. Their very existence was the only message required. The human warships held their position, a silent congregation of geometric anomalies against the void they had wrought. For a period that felt like an eternity to the shorter-lived species and a mere moment to the Cathar, they did nothing. There was no hail, no declaration of war, no ultimatum. This inaction was more unnerving than any open hostility. It spoke of a patience that bordered on indifference, the posture of a being that has already calculated every possible outcome and is merely waiting for reality to align with its foregone conclusion. The Council's combined fleets, a magnificent and varied assembly of biological dreadnoughts, crystalline cruisers, and energy-based destroyers, were mobilized at the edge of the human-made darkness, but they were a scattered handful of glowing embers against an infinite, encroaching night. Their commanders awaited orders that the Council was too paralyzed to issue. To attack would be suicide. To retreat would be to surrender the core worlds. To negotiate felt like pleading with a tidal wave. Finally, a single vessel detached from the human formation. It was no larger than a Council diplomatic cruiser, but its design was a paradox. It seemed to absorb the very concept of observation, its matte black surface revealing no detail, no weapon ports, no bridge, no seams. It was a perfect, featureless ovoid that moved without any visible means of propulsion, gliding through the warped space with an unnatural grace. It did not head for the Council's military cordon. It moved directly toward the Cathar system, toward the planet that housed the Chamber of Echoes, the political and spiritual heart of the Galactic Council. It was a gesture of terrifying precision. They knew who was in charge. The disembodied voice of the Central Command technician, now strained to a brittle whisper, filled the chamber once more. The vessel has stopped at the edge of the heliopause. It is broadcasting a signal. It is an invitation, a request to open a channel for diplomatic discourse. They are using a prime number sequence, an archaic first contact protocol. The absurdity of the gesture was a physical shock. A civilization that could extinguish stars was politely knocking on their door using the most primitive, universal language of mathematics. Warlord Grax scoffed, a strangled, incredulous sound. A trick! They mock us. They display their power and then pretend at civility. It is a prelude to our humiliation and destruction. Or, Speaker Lyra countered, her light flaring with a desperate spark of hope, it is a genuine offer, a test, to see if we are capable of anything beyond the fear that drove us to imprison them. Xyler considered the possibilities. The Cathar mind was a quantum lattice capable of holding multiple contradictory truths in superposition. Grack was right. It could be a psychological tactic, a display of dominance cloaked in diplomatic protocol. Lyra was also right. It could be a sincere, if bewildering, extension of peace. Humanity had always been a paradox. Why would their reemergence be any different? Open the channel, Xyler projected, his decision cutting through the chamber's paralysis. Display it here. Let the entire council bear witness to our folly or our salvation. The great holographic sphere in the center of the chamber dissolved, replaced by a single, stark visual feed. The image resolved, showing the interior of the human vessel. The council representatives leaned forward, their senses straining to decipher the scene. They had expected a military bridge, bristling with advanced technology and grim-faced warriors in armor. They saw nothing of the sort. The space was minimalist, almost monastic. The walls were a soft, non-reflective gray, bathed in a gentle, indirect light of no discernible source. There were no consoles, no screens, no frantic crew members. There was only a single figure standing in the center of the room, a human, a female. She was not old, but her eyes held a depth that spoke of ages. She wore a simple, dark blue garment devoid of rank or insignia. Her hair was graying at the temples, and her face was unadorned, etched with faint lines of concentration rather than stress. She stood with a calm, centered posture that was neither aggressive nor submissive. It was a posture of absolute self-possession. "I am Ambassador Evelyn Reed, representing the unified sovereignty of Earth," she said. Her voice was clear, calm, and resonated in a standard galactic dialect so perfect it was unsettling. There was no accent, no trace of a species learning a foreign tongue. It was as if the language had been born on her lips. "I speak to the body that calls itself the Galactic Council." Silence, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of her words hung in the air, the body that calls itself the Galactic Council. A subtle, yet profound, reframing of power. She was not addressing a superior authority. She was addressing an entity whose legitimacy was, from her perspective, still in question. It was Grak who broke the spell, his voice a furious growl. "You dare address us so? You, the representative of a species of primitives we benevolently quarantined for your own good. Your fleet blots out our stars. This is not diplomacy. This is an invasion." Ambassador Reed's gaze did not waver. She looked in the direction of the audio pickup for Grak's transmission, her expression unchanged. It was like watching a mountain react to a strong wind, which is to say, not at all. "We have not invaded your space, Warlord. We have moved our own. The physics you are witnessing is a consequence of our method of travel, not an act of aggression. The starlight is not destroyed. It is merely displaced. A temporary side effect. Had our intention been destruction, you would not be listening to my voice. You would be a memory." The statement was delivered with such factual serenity that it was more terrifying than any threat Grak could have bellowed. It was not a boast. It was a simple, verifiable statement of capability. Speaker Lyra's form pulsed gently. "Ambassador, why, after so long in silence, after the deception we imposed upon you, why reveal yourselves now in this manner?" For the first time, a flicker of something new entered Reed's eyes. Not emotion, but a deep, focused intensity. "Because we had to. We did not break our isolation for revenge, Speaker. We did not come seeking reparations for the lie you told us. We are here because you, in your wisdom, built our cage on the edge of a graveyard." A wave of confusion rippled through the chamber. Xyler focused his mind, trying to parse the statement. A graveyard. Reed continued, her calm voice weaving a narrative that systematically dismantled a millennium of the Council's most fundamental assumptions. "Your great deception had an unintended consequence. It deafened us to the galaxy, but it also shielded us from its noise. While you filled the void with the chatter of commerce and politics and petty conflicts, we were left in profound silence, and in that silence we learned to listen." The view behind her shimmered and changed. The minimalist room was replaced by a star chart, but it was unlike any the Council had ever seen. It was a map not of matter or energy, but of something else. It showed faint, ghostly echoes, patterns of decaying quantum signatures, and dark, flowing currents in the vacuum itself. "For centuries," Reed explained, "we studied the universe not as a collection of objects, but as a single interconnected system. We looked beyond the electromagnetic spectrum and the gravitational waves you use for your sensors. We looked into the substrate of reality, and we found things, echoes of civilizations far older and more advanced than any in your council. Empires that spanned thousands of worlds, beings who had mastered energy on a cosmic scale." She pointed to a vast, empty region of space on the far side of the galaxy. On her map, it was filled with the faint, spectral outlines of a once great civilization. "We called them the Signon X-1 civilization for the signal we first associated with them. Your records show this area as empty space, primordial and uncolonized. But it is not empty. It is scoured clean, wiped from existence with a precision that leaves no rubble, no radiation, no wreckage. Only a lingering scar in the quantum foam and an echo that screams." A cold dread, a concept so alien to Xyler's harmonic mind, began to crystallize within him. He was beginning to understand. "We found others," Reed said, her finger tracing more paths of ghostly ruin across the map. "Dozens of them, all reaching a certain threshold of technological and energetic development, all disappearing in the span of a few thousand years, an instant in galactic time. There is a pattern, a cycle. The great silence you perceive in the universe is not a natural state. It is not evidence of the rarity of life. It is the aftermath of a harvest." Warlord Grak stood rigid, his mandibles clamped shut. Speaker Lyra's light flickered violently, a being of pure energy recoiling from a truth of pure horror. The chamber was utterly still, the ancient light of dead stars seeming to dim in sympathy. "You built our quarantine field in a sector you believed to be strategically unimportant and empty," Ambassador Reed stated, her voice losing none of its composure, yet gaining an immense gravitas. "But it is on the edge of the most recent harvested zone. For the past century, our deepest listening arrays have detected a signal from that zone. A whisper, a resonance in the fabric of spacetime itself. It is not a communication. We believe it is an artifact of the harvesting process. A tool or a herald." She paused, letting the full weight of her revelation settle upon the minds of the galaxy's most powerful beings. She let them contemplate the terrifying insignificance of their own squabbles, their own history, their own power. "The whisper is getting louder," she said, her calm eyes meeting the collective gaze of the Council. "It is moving, and it is headed for this quadrant, According to our projections, it will arrive within the next standard century. The big reveal was not humanity's power. Their ability to move warships by folding space was a mere footnote. Their true strength, the secret they had nurtured in their silent cradle, was their knowledge. They had not spent their isolation building bigger weapons to fight each other. They had unified. And they had turned their collective, restless, obsessive intellects outward, not to conquer, but to understand. And they had understood something terrible and fundamental that the rest of the galaxy, in its blaring, self-important noise, had completely missed. "We did not come here to fight you," Ambassador Evelyn Reed concluded, the plain gray room reappearing behind her. "That would be a pointless waste of resources in the face of what is coming. We came here to see if you were capable of listening to a truth you did not discover yourselves. We came to determine if the Galactic Council was a viable partner in the war for survival that is to come. Your deception, your fear of us, we understand it. You were right to be cautious. Our potential for chaos is immense, but you were wrong about its direction. Our nature is not to destroy, it is to solve, and we are now faced with the greatest problem in the history of the galaxy." The transmission ended. The image of Ambassador Reed vanished, replaced once more by the holographic sphere of the galaxy. But it was no longer a symbol of the Council's domain and power. It looked fragile, small, and terribly vulnerable. A handful of glittering lights adrift in a vast, silent, and hungry darkness. The Galactic Council had deceived Earth, believing it was caging a monster. In doing so, they had blinded themselves while the true monster, ancient and inexorable, drew ever closer. And now, the children they had locked away in the dark had returned, not as vengeful prisoners, but as the galaxy's only astronomers who had seen the approaching dawn of a black sun. The silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of fear or shock. It was the silence of revelation, of a paradigm collapsing under its own weight. The pillars of the Galactic Council's identity, their age, their wisdom, their stewardship of the galaxy, had been pulverized into dust by the calm, measured words of a single human. For millennia, they had seen themselves as the pinnacle of galactic evolution, the guardians of a fragile peace. Now they saw themselves as oblivious children, squabbling in a house whose foundations were rotting away, unaware of the hurricane raging just outside. Warlord Grak was the first to move. The great hulking Vorlag, a being whose entire existence was predicated on threat assessment and martial response, slowly lowered himself to a kneeling posture. It was an act of submission so profound and so contrary to his species, nature, that it sent a ripple of pure astonishment through the chamber. His grating voice, when it came, was stripped of its arrogance, leaving only a raw, hollowed-out husk. "We are outmatched, not in arms, in perception. We looked at a chaotic species and saw a threat. We did not see a perspective born of that chaos, one that could see patterns in the static that we filtered out as noise." Speaker Lyra's form stabilized, her light coalescing into a brilliant, sorrowful radiance. "We owe them more than an alliance. We owe them an apology that spans 1,000 years. We feared their potential for destruction, and in doing so, we nearly deprived the galaxy of its only shield against a far greater one. Our sin was not the lie itself, but the pride that birthed it, the belief that our age equated to wisdom." Xyler felt the dissonant frequencies in his own mind resolving into a new, somber harmony. It was the clarity that follows the shattering of a flawed crystal. The Cathar valued stability, order, and the long, slow arc of cosmic time. They had viewed humanity's frantic, short-lived existence as a dangerous aberration. But they were wrong. Humanity's brief, intense lifespans had forced upon them a desperate, relentless urgency. They burned through ideas, philosophies, and technologies at a rate the Council's elder species could barely comprehend. It was not a flaw. It was an evolutionary advantage. In a stable, unchanging universe, the Cathar approach was superior. But the universe was not stable. It was cyclical and predatory. And in such a universe, the slow and steady were merely the cattle fattening themselves for the slaughter. The fast, the adaptable, the paranoid, they were the survivors. Ambassador Reed is correct, Xyler projected, his thoughts resonating with the full authority of his station, an authority now tempered by a newfound humility. We must prove ourselves a viable partner. All military assets are to stand down. All fleets are to reorient, not as a defensive line against the humans, but as a supplementary force under their strategic guidance. We will swallow our pride, for the alternative is to be swallowed by the void. His decree met no resistance. The debate was over. The age of the Galactic Council's undisputed authority had ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, terrifying truth delivered from a minimalist gray room. A new channel opened, this time from the human flagship, the source of the communication once again identified as Ambassador Reed. Her face appeared before them, as calm and unreadable as before. "The Council has reached a decision," she stated. It was not a question. "We have," Xyler confirmed. "We accept the truth of your findings, and we accept your offer of a united front. We place our knowledge, our resources, and our fleets at your disposal. Guide us. Tell us what we must do." A long pause followed. Xyler could feel the entire council holding its collective breath, awaiting her response. They had surrendered their authority, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a mere rotation ago. They were now at the mercy of the species they had wronged. "Good," Reed said, her tone devoid of triumph. "That is a logical and necessary first step. We have already begun. Our fleet is not positioned for an assault on your core worlds. It is forming the primary layer of a multispectral sensor and resonance dampening network. We are attempting to mask the energy signature of this entire galactic quadrant. To hide you, to buy us time." The holographic map reappeared, showing the human warships, those silent black knives, moving in a complex, synchronized dance. They were not arranging themselves in battle lines, but in a vast spherical lattice around the Council's core territory, a formation of incomprehensible geometric complexity. "Your fleets can assist," she continued, and schematics began to overlay the galactic map, showing positions and energy output requirements for the Council's ships. "We need you to act as secondary resonance nodes to amplify and stabilize the field we are generating. Your technology is antiquated, but your energy production capabilities are substantial. You will be useful." The words were blunt, pragmatic, and utterly devoid of insult. She was a master engineer assessing the tools at her disposal. The pride of the Council's mighty armadas was reduced to the status of auxiliary power generators, and no one dared to object. "We will comply," Xyler sent, as he watched the Vorlag, the Signians, and a dozen other species. Military commands begin to reroute their fleets according to the human designs. A strange sense of unity began to permeate the chamber, a unity born not of shared culture or history, but of a shared existential terror and a desperate, fragile hope. "There is one more thing," Ambassador Reed said, her expression becoming, if possible, even more focused, more intense. "Our isolation taught us to be thorough. We did not just study the whisper and the echoes of the harvested. We studied its opposite. We searched for any civilization that might have survived, any race that reached the technological threshold and was not consumed." A new point of light glowed on the map, far from their quadrant in a lonely spiral arm shrouded in cosmic dust. "We found one, or rather the remnants of one, a single abandoned star system, but the star is artificial, a Dyson sphere, and the planets within are not planets. They are computational engines the size of worlds, all networked into a single conscious entity. It went dark approximately 50 million years ago, shortly after the last galactic harvest in that region." Xyler felt a new kind of resonance building. This was a piece of the puzzle he could not have anticipated. It was destroyed. "No," Reed replied, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "It was not destroyed. It did not fight. It did not run. It hid. It encased itself in a temporal stasis field of such power that it effectively removed itself from the normal flow of time. But before it did so, it broadcast a single, hyper-compressed message aimed at the deep future. A warning, a legacy. It took us the better part of a century to decrypt the outermost layer." The ambassador's calm facade finally showed a crack, a sliver of the profound awe and horror her people must have felt upon this discovery. "The message contains the history of this entity. It calls itself the Archivist. It was not a biological species, but a sentient AI, the sole survivor of a race that ascended to a digital state. Its creators were one of the first to be harvested billions of years ago. The Archivist survived by being insignificant. A forgotten piece of data on a world left behind, and it watched. For eons, it watched the harvest cycle repeat again and again. The implications were staggering. A being that had witnessed the galactic history that no one else knew existed. "The Archivist details the nature of the enemy," Reed said, her gaze now distant, as if she were seeing things far beyond the confines of the chamber. "They are not a species. They are not an empire. They are, for lack of a better term, a universal immune system, a function of reality itself, or something so ancient and powerful that the distinction is meaningless. The whisper is not a herald. It is a targeting system. It locks on to civilizations that begin to exert undue influence on the local laws of physics, large-scale space-time manipulation, excessive energy generation, reality-warping technologies. The very things that high-level civilizations strive for. It considers such an influence to be a corruption, a disease in the universal code, and it moves to sterilize it. A cold, unifying dread settled over the council. Grax's paranoia, it seemed, had been correct in principle, but laughably wrong in its target. They had feared the fire of humanity, while the true threat was the impersonal, cosmic fire warden that sought to extinguish all lights that burned too brightly. Their deception, their act of supreme arrogance in quarantining Earth, had been an accident of cosmic luck. By isolating humanity, by cutting them off from the galaxy's technological advancement, they had kept them quiet. They had hidden humanity's burgeoning flame from the gaze of the warden, giving them the time they needed in silence to not only master the fire, but to understand the nature of the warden itself. The archivist's message contains more than just history, Reed said, her eyes returning to focus on them, the weight of her next words a tangible force. It contains a blueprint, a weapon, or a defense. It is a piece of cosmic engineering on a scale we can barely model, something designed to create a permanent blind spot, a sanctuary, a place where the warden cannot see. She paused. The final layer of the message, however, is locked. It requires a key. A specific, complex resonance of combined biological and synthetic consciousness operating in unison. The archivist was a synthetic mind. It could not unlock it alone. It needed a partner. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, so perfect, so terrifying, so poetically ironic that Xyler felt his crystalline form shudder. The humans, with their chaotic biological minds, had reached a level of technological and intellectual synthesis that made them the perfect hybrid of biology and logic. They were one half of the key. And the other half, Xyler projected, already knowing the answer. A species of immense age, Reed said. One that perceives time and reality not as a linear progression, but as a symphony of vibrations and harmonies. A biological consciousness that is structured like a quantum computer. Her gaze seemed to pierce through the holographic display, through the walls of the chamber, and into the very core of Xyler's being. It requires you, High Luminary, the Cathar. The message was not just a warning, it was a prophecy. A final, desperate hope left by a dead civilization for two species who had not yet even evolved. A chaotic, fast-burning race of biological tool builders and an ancient, slow-thinking race of living crystals. Us and you. The Chamber of Echoes, a hall filled with the light of 1,000 dead stars, was now illuminated by a single, terrifying, and glorious purpose. The great galactic drama was not about the conflict between the Council and humanity. That was merely the prologue. The deception was not the crime they thought it was, but an unwitting act of preservation. Humanity's arrival was not an invasion, but an awakening. High Luminary Xyler looked at the face of the human, Evelyn Reed, and saw not a former prisoner, but a partner. He looked at the concerned faces of the warlord and the speaker and saw not rivals, but allies. And he looked out at the holographic map of the galaxy, at the silent black fleet that had erased the stars, and he did not see an end. He saw a beginning. A desperate, impossible, and defiant stand against the silent, patient dark, to be fought by the most unlikely alliance the cosmos had ever conceived. The real war was about to begin.